Howdy, folks. I'm here today with a video on figurative language and working to analyze it in terms of its rhetorical effect. This is fitting into our overall unit skills by connecting with stylistic choices that a writer makes. Figurative language, as we'll see, really does influence the overall feel and tone of a piece with how they're incorporating these ideas of using the figurative, the non-literal, to make a literal point. So to start off, let's make sure we have an understanding of what figurative language is. Again, it's saying something that is not literally true in order to express an idea that is true. It helps us reinforce our ideas, and it helps sometimes the reader connect things that otherwise might be hard for them to grasp. This can really connect with a reader emotionally. So for example, take a look at the snow is a blanket on the hills. Now the snow isn't literally a knitted blanket that someone like crocheted together and tossed out over the hills, right? But this is evoking certain emotions, right? Even though I'm talking about snow, there's this connotative warmth about it, right? If it's a blanket on the hills, that's giving me this peaceful, not frigid, cold feel about what the snow is doing. Connotation and word choice is playing into my use of this non-literal explanation of snow. So I can connect emotionally there too. I can also connect kind of logically by using some pieces of figurative language. I'll give you an example. So an analogy, which is a comparison between two things, typically for the purpose of explanation, an analogy might help readers logically connect ideas. So one of my consistent analogies in my class is writing is like building a house. You need to plan out your house before you start building it. And as a writer, you should plan out your essay before you start writing it. And at the end of everything, you should make sure your walls are where you want before you start like painting the walls and hanging pictures. Similar to an essay, you should make sure all your structural pieces and parts are in there first before you go in and start editing. Because if you have to move walls, you're going to have to paint again. And if you have to move sentences and essay or paragraphs, you're probably going to make some grammatical mistakes and you'll need to re-edit everything. So here's a list of common literary devices. You should definitely know these ones off the top of your head. First off, my wife apologizes for the example. She wrote these. But then I also have a link. This is linked on the Google Classroom to these 40 other terms that you probably should have a somewhat familiarity with. Now, the AP exam is not, the AP language exam is not going to test you like, do you know what anaphora is? Or do you know what antithesis is? It's not going to be on the multiple choice question. It's not going to be a part of your writing. Where it might come into play in part of your writing is if you're reading a piece for rhetorical analysis and like they are using some of these figurative language devices that you should rhetorically analyze. So, and think about what that might do to your sophistication score in your writing. If you can correctly identify and analyze antithesis and its rhetorical effect, that's going to help you in your rhetorical analysis. So look over these terms, don't have to memorize them, should have some familiarity with them. Okay, let's do some practice of connecting, identifying these pieces of figurative language with figuring out how they are affecting a piece of writing. So step number one is you got to know what figurative language you're talking about. You do not want to accidentally call personification something else, because that will really hurt your score on a rhetorical analysis, is if you misidentify something. And really similar to diction or syntax, don't talk about figurative language unless you have something intelligent to say. So this may or may not come into play on the specific AP exam, but it is something that you should know in general about rhetoric and writing and argument. So identify what the figurative language is, and then figure out, what is it doing? What effect is this having on my reader? Is it helping establish my tone? Is it creating that emotional connection, or is it creating that logical connection, or maybe both? And how might these, this is kind of an optional question, how might these connect to a bigger organizational structure? Let's do a little bit of practice with this. So I want you to take a read through this section of an essay from Frederick Douglass on the blessings, I think it's on the blessings and liberty of education. And see if you can answer this question. The analogies of the flint and steel and the violin serve to blank. So press pause, see if you can come up with the right letter. Did you do it? I hope so. And I'll kind of take you through my process of elimination that I would walk through if I was approaching this on the AP exam. So obviously I'd read the section, I'd pay particular close attention to the highlighted section because that's the literal analogy we're talking about. So is this analogy defining the specific benefits of education? I don't see a lot of specificity here. He gives two examples, but there's music in the violin, but the touch of the master is needed to fill the air and the soul with concord to sweet sounds. No specificity there about like what it means to study and practice the violin, or what it means, or how do you actually go into creating fire with flint and steel. So A is out. Emphasize the need for education in forming a human. Maybe. I'm going to put this one on my maybe list because I can see these analogies and I kind of understand, well, there's fire in the flint and steel, but we need to be educated to how to make fire using flint and steel. There is music in the violin, but we need someone who knows how to play the violin in order for it to make appropriate sound. So B is in my maybe. To suggest the capabilities of the intellect as opposed to the body. This one's also going to be a maybe, because if we are reading the passage as a whole, I think this one could be correct. But it's not asking about the passage as a whole, right? It's asking about specifically the analogies that we're using here. So you might be tempted by C by looking at the whole paragraph, but I still think B is a stronger answer. And then lastly, to contrast the practical with the aesthetic, I mean, he's talking about both. Flint and steel is practical, fire is practical, music is aesthetic, like about the arts. But I don't think that's what he's specifically trying to show with this analogy. It's not showing that there's a difference between flint and steel and violins. He's saying both of these, in order to make either of these work, you need education. So I think B is the strongest answer there. All right. Second practice is I want you to take a read through this larger piece as a whole. So this is from the Blessings of Liberty and Education from Frederick Douglass. The document is linked on Google Classroom. And as you are reading this, I want you to identify at least one figurative language device. And so these are the ones that I found as I was reading it: parallelism, metaphor, analogy, antithesis, simile, personification. You just need to recognize one of those and then try to explain its impact. So read this piece, identify at least one of these, and then see if you can figure out what is that figurative language device doing. So go do that now. Pause this video. Again, hope you really did it. And here's going to be my example of identifying a piece of figurative language. So the very elements conspire against him, talking about human, kind of helpless human beings. Elements in the natural world don't get together and conspire against human beings. So in this case, Frederick Douglass is using personification to make a point. So as I'm reading, maybe this line stood out to me and like, interesting use of personification. I wonder if I can figure out what he's meaning, or interpret and analyze maybe some ideas about how this is impacting me as a reader. So I might come up with something like this. When Douglass considers the state of an undedicated human, he makes it clear the ineptitude of such a being. So someone who's not dedicated to education, and he's kind of saying these people are in trouble. So Douglass personifies the very elements of nature, and I go on to list these because Douglass doesn't list them, but I can assume here's what he's implying about food, water, shelter, predators, that these elements conspire against, I say, nascent and ignorant humans, which means young and stupid human beings. And so that's what he's doing. And he's doing this, I think, in order to set up this dichotomy, kind of like these two modes that we can view the world through. And simply, he's saying it's either education or you're going to be versing the world. Like everything that the world can throw at you, you're going to have trouble with. And I kind of go on to explain that. So not only take a look at what this paragraph structure in terms of explaining, okay, here's what he's doing, here's why he's doing it. Take a look at the way that I'm using quoted material to kind of back up and develop my responses. So you should be working on this as well. All right. Last practice in your official homework assignment is we're going back into the world of boxing. And again, it's not good. Apparently, a lot of authors have written very critical pieces about boxing. This is beautifully written. It is kind of a sad story because someone dies this time. I mean, the name of the story is the death of, I think it's Benny Paret. But it is wonderfully written, tragic, and lots of very vivid figurative language being used that you guys are going to analyze. All right, good luck.